In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a hot pad or pot holder or a trivet using up your tiny little scraps of fabric. So let's go. In order to make this scrappy hot pad, I'm going to be using a bunch of scraps that I have in the same sort of black, white, gray color scheme. I'm also going to be using a long 3-inch strip of fabric as the binding. I'm going to be using 3 layers of organic cotton batting as the heat barrier in my hot pad. You could definitely use a material that's specifically for heat, but cotton batting 3 layers is a nice all-natural, plastic-free, compostable alternative to the specific heat-resistant type materials. The first step is to find your beginning scrap piece. And then I'm just gonna start sewing other pieces onto my first piece and until I have a 9 by 9 inch square. I have a video that walks you through this piecing process step by step. I'm gonna link to that video here, but in this video, I am going to show you what it looks like once I've finished piecing all of these scraps into a 9 by 9 inch square. So I'm gonna start piecing them together. I finished sewing together a bunch of scraps, and now I know that they are large enough to cut out a 9 by 9 inch square from each of them. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my measuring, my cutting mat, and I'm gonna cut these down to 9 by 9 inches. So my 2 squares are now 9 inches by 9 inches, and in the next step, I'm gonna be doing a really simple quilting of the square onto the cotton batting. And I have 3 pieces, so I'm going to quilt 1 square onto 1 and the other square onto 2, and it really doesn't matter which square has 1 versus 2. Over at the machine, I'm gonna start at one corner of the square, and I'm just gonna do a diagonal line all the way down from corner to corner, and I bumped up my stitch length to 5 millimeters. So I'm just gonna go straight down. So this first diagonal line is done. I'm just going to turn my piece and start from this corner towards the other corner to make a second diagonal line, so I'll have a little crisscross pattern on my square. So these have really simple quilting done on them now, and what we want to do next is actually stitch them together. So I'm putting the batting sides together so that the pretty sides are both facing outward, and I actually want to sew them together with about 1/4 of an inch or less seam allowance, leaving these raw edges exposed. I'm just going to start on one of the sides, and I'm still at a really wide stitch or a long stitch length. I'm still at 5 millimeters. I'm just going to go around the edges about 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge. So you can see how they're joined together now. Now I want to take my 3-inch strip of fabric and fold it in half lengthwise. So now it's about 1.5 inches wide, and press it with the iron all the way down the full length. Once the binding is ironed, I'm going to clip it onto one of the sides. It doesn't matter which one. And I want the raw edge of the binding to be lined up with the raw edge of my hot pad. And I want to have a couple of 2 or 3 inches of binding that's loose, because we're going to be joining the binding at the end. And I'm going to go ahead and sew the binding onto the raw edge of the hot pad. I'm going to try to sew right on top of those stitches that I used to join all these layers together. I'm going to put my stitch length back down to 3.2. make sure to do backstitch, and then just keep going until I get near the first corner. When I'm about a 1/4 inch away from the corner, I want my needle down, and I'm going to lift my presser foot and turn the whole hot pad, and then I'm just going to sew diagonally straight off this corner. So the stitches should look like that. And then I'm going to turn my hot pad and I'm going to fold my binding up. And I want the folded edge to line up with this raw edge. And I want a nice little diagonal crease. And then I'm going to start sewing on this raw edge, but I'm going to start my stitches about a 1/4 inch away from here so that I don't sew over my diagonal line. I'm going to just start sewing right after that folded edge. I can kind of feel it underneath with my fingers, and I do want to back stitch at the very start here. And then I'm just going to sew straight down and do the same thing on my other corners. I'm at my last corner now, and I want to make sure that I stop with a couple of inches of binding that's still loose so that I can join it with the first part of the binding. So I'm only going to sew about a couple inches down, and then I will stop. So I already trimmed off some of the extra binding, but first I found where the binding lines up, and I have marked a line with a pencil to show where the binding, these two ends touch one another. And then at the machine, I'm going to open this binding up, sort of push the hot pad out of the way, and I'm going to sew the bindings together right along that line that I drew with the pencil. So I sewed my binding together where they met, and now all you have to do is just fold it nicely, and it should lay, if your markings were good, it should lay flat, and then I can just finish sewing straight down my line of stitches. Ta-da! Once my binding is totally attached, I'm just gonna fold it over and attach it to the back side with my binder clips. And at the corners, I'm gonna fold it just so that it sits neatly like that. And I'm gonna go ahead and clip this on all 4 sides. Once it's clipped all the way around, I'm just going to start sewing. I'm sewing on the top side, not the loose floppy side. And I'm trying to sew right next to this, sort of like right in this ditch here, right next to this folded edge. And that should catch the binding on the back as well. Trim the loose threads and you are done. And I'm gonna link to another video right here that uses this same scrappy quilting technique to get you a really cute bag.